And as I'm looking through the junk box, I'm seeing hundreds of pages from many different books. And all of a sudden, I come across a page, and I look at this and I say, wait a minute. That's a gospel in Hebrew.
This is a day I've been waiting for nearly 2 decades. What we are going to present to you tonight, I have been waiting for a long time since Nehemia came out with his original work on Shem Tov's Hebrew Matthew, and we toured the United States over a 2-month period of time with Raiders of the Lost Book, discoveries in the ancient Hebrew text of the Gospel of Matthew. And Nehemia had, at that time, uncovered several texts of the Hebrew Matthew that had not been known, had been hidden away in the archives of Jewish scribes for untold number of years. And because of his research, we were able to solve problems that were unintelligible in the Greek text of the Gospel of Matthew and also in the English text. And so these discoveries in the Hebrew text of Matthew gave us insights into the Gospels that had eluded scholars for generations. Now Nehemia is going to bring forth some of the other Gospels that he has now found in the Hebrew language. We have Nehemia's book, the Greek Jesus versus the Hebrew Yeshua. This is where he lays out the detail of solving the problem of Matthew 23. And ladies and gentlemen, I suggest that you get these and you study them because it's going to lay the groundwork of what now we're able to lay out after all these years. You are going to be the first ones to see it, and tonight I'm going to be the first one to see some of these manuscripts for the first time myself. Nehemia, it's good to have you back.
Great
and
to be back,
I am looking forward to what is happening tonight on Shabbat Night Live.
Well, so, this is what we've been waiting several weeks for, Michael. I'm really excited about this. So I told the people last week about the Vatican junk box, and it really came out of that research I was doing with Matthew 23. I had found these manuscripts of Hebrew Matthew. George Howard found 9, and I had found 14, and I said, there's got to be more. And it turned out by the time we did that video, I believe we had 26, and later I found 2 more. But the process was I would get these microfilms, and I would put them on the reader, analog reader, and I'm swirling them, looking through them. And one of these microfilms turned out it was in the Vatican, and it said miscellaneous. And I said, well, that's interesting. Let's see what's miscellaneous. And as I'm looking through, I'm realizing this is a junk box. They have a loose page.
What do you mean by junk box?
Well, I was once told by a mechanic, when you put a car back together and you're left with 3 extra bolts, you just throw them in the junk box. So this is what would happen in the Vatican. Somebody was reading a manuscript. They, maybe 10 manuscripts. They'd put them back in the shelf, and they'd see on the table there was an extra page left there. And they, well, what do we do with this? We don't know where it goes. We put it in the junk box. And
these are ancient manuscripts that pages do come out and
all the time.
Don't know what to do with them.
They open up a book nobody's opened up for 200 years, and there's worms in there eating the book, and all kinds of things are happening, right? And there's mold, all kinds of problems you're having with manuscripts. And so they would put these pages in the junk box. So I'm looking at this microfilm at the National Library of Israel, and it's a microfilm of a junk box. Now, back then, I only had it black and white. What's new and why I'm able to share this now publicly is now I've got the high-resolution color images because of this worldwide project of digitizing Hebrew manuscripts. And I'm going to show people here for the first time some of the other pages from the junk box. So here, for example, we have a page from the junk box, and you can see it says Bibliotheca Apostolica Vaticana, the Apostolic Library of the Vatican. And this is some page of some document that was fell out of a book or was torn out of a book, and it's some sort of Kabbalistic work or something.
Yeah, it's got a star.
Yeah, it's got some weird drawings on it. It's some kind of Kabbalistic document. Here's another page from some other book completely. It's actually an early printed book. And this is a book of how to teach children. It's got the alphabet with all the different combinations of the vowels. And there's a picture here of the very simple wood etching, they call these, where the teacher has, to spare the rod, spoil the child, it's expressing. And it talks here about the young boy. And it's literally a children's book that fell out of some book, early book they had, or early printed book. Put it in the junk box.
Yeah, so it's Hebrew, so it's not anything that concerns them.
Well, even if it concerns them, they don't know what to do with it, right? Because they had Up until the last decade or so, the Hebrew manuscripts in the Vatican had never been cataloged. It was scholars from the National Library of Israel that went to the library for the first time and cataloged it from the Institute of Microfilmed Hebrew Manuscripts. Nobody had ever cataloged it because they couldn't read Hebrew, right? Occasionally they'd look at a book here, a book there. They had some idea it was there, but they didn't have a systematic idea. Here's another page, which is from a book in German. I don't even know if it's doing in there, if it's even a Jewish book. This was just a junk box where they put stuff. Most of them are Hebrew books. And as I'm looking through the junk box, I'm seeing hundreds of pages from many different books. And all of a sudden I come across a page and I look at this and I say, wait a minute, that's a gospel in Hebrew. And first I found Luke, and there were 3 pages of Luke. And then I found a single page from the Gospel of John. Can I read that to the people, what it says? People, this is the first time this is being shown publicly to the world. I don't know where this came from, other than that it's from the Vatican. Where the Vatican got it from, I don't know. What's really cool is at the bottom of the page.
It's just one page.
It's just one page from John. At the bottom of the page, you have what they call a hanging word. It's a single word without vowels. That is the first word from the next page.
And without the vowels, that tells you that it continues on to the next page.
Oh, yeah. So what they would do is they put the first word of the next page at the bottom of the previous page. So you turn the page and you know what to look for. And if the pages aren't in order, that's very helpful, of course. So we know there was another page. We just don't have it. So let me read you for the first time from the Gospel of John in the Vatican Library, from the junk box of the Vatican Library. I mean, this truly is a treasure. Right? There's movies about things like this, like, American Treasure, and I hate to say it, but the Da Vinci Code, where there's some treasure somewhere we're going to find, and I found it in a microfilm of the junk box in the Vatican, and this has never been talked about publicly as far as I know, and certainly when I found it, nobody knew about this around 17 years ago or so. Here's what it says. I'll read it in Hebrew and then translate it. Habsorah kedosha shel Yeshua HaMashiach Kifi Yochanan, the holy gospel of Yeshua the Mashiach, according to Yochanan. Perek Rishon, chapter 1. Bereshit haya hadavar, v'hadavar haya etzel ha'elohim, v'ha'elohim hu haya hadavar. In the beginning was the word, the davar, and the word was next to Elohim. Now, that word next to is the Hebrew word etzel. You might be able to translate that as with. I think it's a bit of a stretch.
With is in King James.
Right, with, and the word was with God. Here it's etzel, which is next to. And I saw that, I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. Well, you have this verse in the New Testament. It's in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 20, which he worked in Christ, which he raised him from the dead, and seated him at his right hand in the heavenly places.
That's very close to.
I gotta wonder.
Next to.
I gotta wonder. It's literally next to, right? At the right hand. Hebrews 8:1. Now, this is the main point of the things we are saying. We have such a high priest who is seated at the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens. So I gotta wonder if that's what's going on in this Hebrew edition of this Hebrew text of John that I've discovered in the Vatican. And it goes on and it says...
that goes back to the Psalms. Seated at my right hand till I make thy enemies thy footstool.
Okay. Wow. So, Elohim hu haya davar, zeh haya bereshit etzel ha'elohim. This was in the beginning next to Elohim. Of course, Elohim is the Hebrew word for God. It says, kol hadvarim ne'asu bo. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made from all that was. Bo hayu hachayim, in him was life. V'hachayim hayu or ha'anashim, and life was the light of men. V'ha'or haya zoreach ba'afelot, v'afelot lo hechiluhu, and the light was shining forth in the darkness, and the darkness could not contain it, meaning the light. Vayihi ish echad shaluach me'et Elohim u'shmo Yochanan, and there was a certain man sent from God, and his name was Yochanan. That's Hebrew for John. And it goes on and it says, Zeh ba be'edut laha'id hala'or leman asher ya'aminu hakol ba'avuro. This one came in testimony to testify concerning the light, in order that they would believe everything because of him. Hu lo haya davar ki im laha'id ha'or. He was not the light, but only testifying concerning the light, meaning John. Haya or amiti hameir lechol adam haba el ha'olam. It was true light to shed light on every man who enters into this world. Hu haya ba'olam va'olam ne'asa bo. He was in the world, and the world was made through him. Va'olam lo hekiruhu, and the world did not recognize him. Ba el moladato mamash, u'bnei beito lo kibluhu. He came to his true homeland or birthplace, and the children of his house did not accept him. L'chol asher kiblu ma'aminim bishmo natan memshala shiyu bnei ha'elohim. And to all those who accepted him and believe in his name, he gave dominion that they would be sons of Elohim. Asher hem lo midam velo michefetz habasar adam. For they were not born out of blood and not out of the desire of flesh. Velo michefetz adam lo ladu ki me'et ha'elohim. Not out of the desire of men, but from Elohim. And then it ends. Like, what's next? I don't know.
The last word on the page.
The last word is Elohim, which means God, or the one God, the true God. And then it ends. And we don't know what's next. And who knows if that's someone. I mean, think about it. The conspiracy always is the Vatican's hiding it. No, quite literally, the Vatican was so incompetent, they don't even know what they have. They had no idea. It's just in the junk box. Now, again, is this the original Hebrew? I don't know. All I know is this is a Hebrew. I mean, this is what we dreamed of as a scholar, certainly. You dream of finding something like this, the lost gospels in the Vatican. And here we have 4 pages from a lost gospel in the Vatican. And it's not that they were hiding it to be malicious. They just didn't know. Now, I want to tell you a story, Michael. I heard this when I was in elementary school. I went to an ultra-Orthodox elementary school in Chicago, and we had this man come. He was a rabbi, and he told us how he would go into the Vatican at the time, and they wouldn't allow him to bring pen and paper, but they would allow him to study the manuscripts. So he would walk in there into the library, go through all the check, make sure he's not, of course he can't bring a camera, and we're talking the 80s, right? He's not bringing a phone, it wasn't possible back then. He wasn't allowed to bring pen and paper. He had to go in, memorize a line of one of the manuscripts, run out after about an hour, write down everything he could remember, go back in again. And this man must have had a photographic memory. That's how he was doing it in the 80s. And now anybody who's listening to this program can go to my website, nehemiaswall.com, and see the full text and translation. You can, and there will be a link there to the Vatican website where you can see the original document here. You don't have to believe me. You can see it for yourself. I mean, think what a miracle this is. We go from where the rabbi is sitting there memorizing the text, and he's probably not interested in this text. He's memorizing the manuscript of the Mishnah they have there and other documents. And we've now gone to the point where at a click of a button, you can find these things. Like, it's a miracle, Michael. Michael, this is a miracle.
Knowledge is increasing.
Knowledge
We're running
is increasing.
to and fro with our computers at the speed of nanoseconds.
It's incredible, Michael, what's going on here. Well, now can I read a little bit from Luke? I don't think we have time for the whole thing.
Okay. Well, let's do this. Everyone, get out a pen, get out your Bibles. This is the time that you can actually mark in your Bibles and bring it right back to the Hebrew. All right.
The holy gospel or good news of Yeshua the Messiah, HaMashiach, the Mashiach, according to Luke or Luca.
That's a lot more full than the King James has.
Is it? Well, I mean, that's what it says here.
Yeah, well, beautiful.
And people can see it. They see it here now on the screen. For the first time, this is being shown publicly.
King James, the gospel according to Luke.
That's all you got there, right?
That's all we got.
Okay, here it is. By the way, I just got to point out here, the name here is written as Yeshua, which is a name that appears in Nehemiah chapter 8, verse 17, referring to Joshua the son of Nun, meaning there's no question from any serious scholarship about how to pronounce that name, Yeshua. No question whatsoever.
Right.
And this is how it's documented in these Hebrew documents that we find in the Vatican and other Hebrew documents. And this one's with vowels, Michael. That's one of the really cool things. Now, I'm gonna skip over the introduction. People can go to my website, nehemiaswall.com, and see that. If you'll allow me to start with chapter 1. And it came to pass in the days of Herod. I'll read it in Hebrew. Vayhi b'mei Hordos melech Yehuda kohen echad u'shmo Zechariah b'bnei Aviyah v'ishto m'bnei Aharon u'shma Elisheva. I'm going to translate up to there. And it came to pass in the days of Herod, king of Judah, a certain Cohen, a priest, his name was Zechariah, from the sons of Aviyah, and his wife was from the children of Aaron, and her name was Elisheva. And this is it, Michael. This is the part that when I saw this,
all right,
in the early 2000s, I was in the library, and I It was every fiber of my being. I had a fight not to shout when I saw this. Vayihiyu shnehem tzadikim, and they both were righteous, lifnei Yehovah, before Yehovah. And there in the Hebrew manuscript of Luke from the Vatican, you can see it here on your screen, people. There it is. It says, tzadikim, righteous, lifnei Yehovah. Righteous before Jehovah. And Jehovah has the full vowels, which we now know from over 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament. We've seen this in the Hebrew Revelation, Sloan 273 from the British Library. And now we're seeing it in the Hebrew text of Luke from the New Testament, from the Vatican junk box. Jehovah with the full vowels. That was known to be the pronunciation of his name.
Oh,
this is incredible.
It is. It is.
Okay, it goes on.
Oh,
and it
this
says,
is beautiful.
All right. I mean, this is incredible stuff. It says, V'holchim b'chol chukei u'mishpatei Yehovah. And walking in all the statutes and judgments
of Yehovah.
Bilti orma, without craftiness, which is really interesting. What do you have there in your English, in your King James?
We're blameless. Yeah, they're blameless. Walking in all the ordinances, commandments of Yehovah, blameless.
Wow. So that's a really interesting kind. I mean, it's incredible.
Yeah. Because they're Cohen. From both of them from Aaron, they have so many more things that they have to perform than the average Israelite, and still they were blameless.
So here it doesn't say blameless in Hebrew; it says without craftiness. And what I understand when I read that in Hebrew is, we've got this commandments, but there's always ways to get around the commandments, and this is something the rabbis are masters of. So, for example, it talks about in the Torah, at every 7 year during the Shemitah, during the sabbatical year, that if your poor brother owes you money, that debt is forgiven. So the rabbis come along and they say, hey, that's a lot of money to pass up on. So they create something called the Pruz Bowl. Pruz Bowl is this concept in rabbinical Judaism where you write a certain type of contract, and therefore the debt carries over through the Shemitah and survives, and the man owes that money for the rest of his life until he pays it off. So I think that's what it means, without craftiness.
Oh, that's beautiful.
I mean, you talk about legalism. There's a lot of things in Jewish tradition which are, one of the things the rabbis do, of course, is they create these fences around the Torah, what Yeshua called the heavy burdens, that they load on the people and they won't lift one finger to do them themselves. But then in other instances, they do something different. They say, hey, these commandments are too hard, the ones God actually tells us to do, because we're so busy doing our man-made takanot, our man-made laws, rules, and regulations. So they come up with these loopholes to get out of doing the actual commandments of God. And I think that's what it means when it says without craftiness.
That's it's interesting. Now, even if we don't get into these other things, at any time like this, just speak up, because that craftiness, the Shmita, when they started it out, rabbis sold the whole land of Israel to an Arab for the year, so it didn't belong to a Jew, and so they could continue planting and harvesting, and then it reverted back. That craftiness is very evident.
There's a reason Jews are such good lawyers. Well, and I'm not trying to be funny.
No,
really, that they're dealing with the Torah and trying to think, wow, God commanded us to do that. We don't want to do it. There's got to be some way we can make where we can throw away the spirit of the law, but through the letter of the law, get out of actually doing it. And I think that's what the craftiness is. I mean, Jews are trained to do this, and then you apply that to other laws, and you might make a very good lawyer. Let me jump ahead here. They did not have children. Elisheva was barren, and both of them were advanced in years. And the Kohen Zechariah had the priesthood before, and it says in Hebrew, this is really interesting, it says before Yehovah. In the order of his family, according to the custom of the service of the priesthood, the lot fell upon him to present the incense, and he came into the sanctuary of Yehovah. And that's the first word on the page. We turn the page here, and we get to the top of the page, and literally the first word, it says at the end of the last page, it says the sanctuary of, and the first word there, the upper right, anybody can see it, it says Yehovah, just like it has every time in this document with the full vowels. Incredible. Let's go on. And it says, and all the throng of the people were standing outside to pray at the time of the incense. And the angel of Yehovah appeared to him standing at the right of the altar of incense. And Zechariah, when he saw him, was terrified, and fear seized hold of him. And the angel said to him, do not fear, Zechariah, for your prayer is heard. And Elisheva, your wife, will give birth to a son, and you shall call his name Yochanan. And there shall be to you joy and happiness. And many will be happy at the time of his birth, for he will be great before Jehovah, and will not drink wine or strong drink, and he will be filled from the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, from the womb of his mother, and he will return many of the children of Israel to Jehovah, their Elohim, and he will walk before him in the spirit and power of Eliyahu, to return the heart of the fathers to the sons, and he will return the heretics to the righteousness of the righteous ones. That's pretty cool. That's kind of different what you got in the Greek. And to prepare to Jehovah the people. Prepared. Now, I want to stop there for a second, and I don't think we're going to be able to read the whole thing, but I want to go back to the name. We're seeing here the name in a Hebrew gospel from the Vatican junk box with the vowels Jehovah, and there's one more thing I hope we have time to get to, but I want to talk about something about the name. One of the things you hear from scholars, there's actual solid scholarship out there from Gesenius, who we've mentioned him before. He was the great Hebrew grammarian, really, of the last 200 years. And although he got a bunch of things wrong, he really was a great grammarian. One of the things he says is those vowels that people think are the name Yehovah, and in English became Jehovah, those are the wrong vowels. And one of the arguments he brings is what's called the preposition argument. It's called the inseparable prepositions, or more accurately, for those who actually know Hebrew, the inseparable particles. So the inseparable particle argument is that when the name Yehovah is preceded by certain letters that are attached to the word, I don't want to get too complicated here, that the first letter is silent, just like it's in Adonai. And I want to show you what Adonai looks like. Adonai is the way Jews traditionally read this. And here we have a manuscript. This is a manuscript from the Russian National Library, EVR B52. And I call this, Michael, the B52 bomber of Hebrew manuscripts, because this proves definitively, puts to rest the whole issue of the vowels. Now, bear with me, people, for one moment here. You see here on your screen, it says Ladonai. That is the word Adonai with what's called the inseparable preposition or inseparable particle. And the la is attached to the word, and it has the vowel you would expect for Adonai. But one of the important things here is that the first letter of Adonai is silent. Why is it silent? Because in Hebrew you have la-a-donai. So la-a, it's a contraction, just like you say in English cannot, becomes can't. It's a typical contraction. It's called the elision of the aleph in Hebrew linguistics. La-donai, silent aleph. So there's no vowel in the aleph when it has the attached preposition. This is the inseparable particle. No aleph and Adonai. Why do we care about this? This is normal. You find this in every single manuscript, every printed Bible. What we discovered in B52, which became the B52 bomber of Hebrew manuscripts, is that when Yehovah is preceded by the attached preposition, it has the full vowels Yehovah. Now, I just told you the first letter of Adonai is silent. There's no vowel in that letter. And what we've been told for 200 years, since the time of Gesenius, is that the vowels of Yud He Vav He, the vowels of the name, are the vowels of Adonai. And therefore, the vowel in the Yud of Yud He Vav He represents the Aleph of Adonai. In fact, in the B52 manuscript, in the B52 bomber, there is no vowel in the Yud. Or let me rephrase that correctly. There is a vowel in the Yud. We expect there to be no vowel based on Gesenius, but in fact, it has the full vowels. And what I can say definitively without question is these are the vowels of the name. They can't be the vowels of Adonai. Now, what does this have to do with the Hebrew Gospels that we discovered in the Vatican junk box that I discovered 17 or 18 years ago? So you open up there, and in Luke, we just read the verse in Luke, and there it says, and to prepare for Yehovah, or to Yehovah the people, and it's La Yehovah with the full vowels. In Adonai, that first letter should have no vowel, but the fact that it has La Yehovah in the B52 bomber Hebrew manuscript, now in over 150 manuscripts of the Old Testament, we know it has this exact same thing. And it's even in the Gospel of Luke in Hebrew, proving definitively from a linguistic perspective that these are the true vowels of the name itself, not the vowels of Adonai. even in the Hebrew Gospel of Luke from the Vatican.
Amen. Amen. I'm not going to have time for Nehemia to go through and translate it all, but in verse 25 of chapter 1, this is what Elizabeth said after she conceives. She says, thus hath Jehovah dealt with me in the days wherein he looked upon me to take away my reproach among men. So that word Lord there is Jehovah with all the proper vowels included. Yeah. And Nehemia, start us off.
I'm going to read a little bit more.
Okay.
So we've seen the name Jehovah here in this Hebrew Luke from the Vatican. The name Yeshua is also there. Can we get to that?
Oh, okay. All right. Wow, that's what.
All right. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from Jehovah in a city of Galilee, and its name was Nazareth, to a certain virgin. And it's interesting there, the Hebrew word for virgin is Betulah.
Mm-hmm.
To a certain Betulah who was betrothed to a man, and his name was Yosef from the house of David. And the name of the virgin, the Betulah, was Miriam. Let me read this now in Hebrew. Ubevo hamalach eleha amar. And when the angel came to her, he said, Shalom lich, meleat chen, Yehovah imach, mevorechet at ben hanashim. And when the angel came to her, he said, Shalom to you, meaning peace. And this is the greeting in Hebrew, Shalom to you, she who is full of grace. Yehovah be with you, or Yehovah is with you. And I love that in Hebrew, because that's exactly what Boaz said to the harvesters in Ruth, and it's exactly what the angel said to Gideon. And in the Mishnah, it says that this is the way the ancient Israelites would greet one another in the name, saying, Yehovah be with you, Yehovah with you. And that's what the angel says to her.
And this is one of Ruth's descendants.
Wow. Yehovah be with you. You are blessed among women. And she looked and was frightened because of his words. And she was thinking, what sort of shalom was this? Meaning he said to her, shalom to you. And she's thinking, what sort of shalom was this?
Shalom is
what
this?
sort of peace is this? Or greeting. And the angel said to her, do not fear, Miriam, for you have found favor before Yehovah. Behold, you are pregnant and will give birth to a son. I'm going to read this in Hebrew. V'karat shmo Yeshua. And you will call his name Yeshua. Ze yehieh gadol. This one will be great. V'yikareh ben Elyon. And he will be called Son of the Most High. V'yiten lo Yehovah kiseh David aviv. And Yehovah Elohim will give him the throne of David his father. V'yimloch al beit Yaakov le'olam. And he will reign over the house of Yaakov, of Jacob, forever. There will be no end to his kingdom. And Miriam said to the angel, how will this be? For I have not known a man. And the angel answered and said to her, the spirit of holiness will enter you, and this is interesting, and an exalted might will be in your shadow or in your protection, which is not quite what it says in the Greek. It's very interesting.
Right.
And I got to read this part in Hebrew. And this is the end, the last words here in Luke. Al asher yeh hanolad kadosh, Yikareh ben Yehovah, because he that will be born will be holy, he shall be called Ben Yehovah, son of Yehovah. And that's what we find in the junk box in the Vatican.
That, ladies and gentlemen, it doesn't get any better from the junk box in the Vatican than that right there. That is just incredible.
And it's just been sitting there for who knows how many centuries, and they don't even know they have it.
And there it is, right in the Hebrew. There's no there's no other way to pronounce it. Yeshua.
It's written right there with the vowels.
And the same thing in the Hebrew Matthew. It's the same.
Absolutely. And look, there's people who say Yahshua and things like that.
I was one of those people. I think I've got a DVD on it.
Well, I mean, I could only call that pseudo-Hebrew because the way those letters are written can't be pronounced Yahshua. I mean, it's just not, it doesn't fit the rules of Hebrew phonology, and maybe we'll do one of the Q&As on that. But and what's interesting is there isn't a debate in Jewish and scholarly literature about the name Yeshua. Mm-hmm. The only real debate is about the name Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, whether those are the vowels of Adonai or those are the actual vowels of the name, and then the whole Yahweh thing. We talked about that in an earlier episode, and really this document, along with over 150 manuscripts of the Old Testament, with the B-52 bomber, with the definitive proof that has what's called the inseparable preposition, proves definitively that is actually the vowels of the name Yehovah. It can't be the vowels of Adonai. And Michael, I mean, I am so blessed You know, people would, often say, what period of history do you want to live in? And look, okay, I would have liked to have been at Mount Sinai. But other than that, maybe to have met Yeshua. Other than that, there's no other period of history I want to have lived in up until now, except other than today. Right now, this moment, we're living in a period where knowledge is increasing, as it talks about in the book of Daniel. I feel like we're living in what it describes in the book of Acts, where it talks about the restoration of all things. Can you read that, Michael?
Yeah, I
think
want to
we're
read
living
that.
in that period of history.
Because this is the disciples, and they have just healed the man who is lame. He's at the Nicanor gate, the beautiful gate, and now they're speaking to the people and speaking and saying, the times of refreshing shall come from the presence of Jehovah, and he shall send Yeshua, Messiah, which before was preached unto you, whom the heaven must receive until the times of the restitution or restoration of all things, which God has spoken by the mouth of the holy prophets since the world began. This is a time that was promised. And in Nehemia, why do you see these discoveries? Why are they so important in our time? Because the Jews are looking for the coming of the Messiah. Mm-hmm. Here, these Jews were saying that the heavens must receive the Messiah until the restoration of all things. Right. And we're seeing things restored that we never imagined. The Gentiles could have never have imagined the stuff that's going on right now.
Well, Michael, I see this as part of a pattern, a pattern of history of restoration. And it's interesting. He doesn't just say this isn't a new doctrine. He says this restoration is something spoken of by the prophets. So when I hear that, I say, well, which prophets? And I look at what's happened really since starting in the 1800s. We had the return of the Jews to the land of Israel. They were scattered throughout the diaspora and began to return in large numbers in the 1800s. We have the restoration of the Hebrew language, which is prophesied in Zephaniah. We'll get to that in a minute. The return of Jewish sovereignty after 2,000 years, the liberation of the Temple Mount and the rest of Jerusalem. I mean, we have a psalm about how Jerusalem is united as a city, and it actually happened in 1967. Mm-hmm. The restoration of the calendar, the restoration now of the name, and the discovery of these Hebrew Gospels. I have to wonder if this isn't part of this whole pattern of restoration. And I'm not a Christian, I'm not a Messianic Jew, but I'm seeing these restorations of these ancient Hebrew documents. I think this could be part of the pattern. And it gets me excited, Michael, because I asked the question, Michael, what's next? If we've seen all these things restored in our lifetime, many of these in my lifetime, things you'd never expect to have happened. I mean, I've shared this with you before on the program about how in the 80s, the Jewish leadership was talking how it would take centuries to liberate the Jews from the Soviet Union. And now over 1 million Jews have returned. I mean, in the return of the Jews from Ethiopia, we are seeing restoration, people waking up around the world and realizing they've been called to the God of Israel. That's the Isaiah 56 prophecy. Michael, I want to read one prophecy to you. Jeremiah 32:41. This is part of what it's talking about in Acts 3:21. So what's really interesting about this verse, let me read it. And this is talking about the return of the exiles, God bringing the exiles back and planting them in their land. He says, I will rejoice over you to do good to you, and I will plant them in this land in truth with all my heart and with all my soul. And you know, Michael, in the entire Bible, it talks repeatedly about loving God with all your heart and all your soul. It's in the Shema. When they asked Yeshua, what's the most important commandment? He said to them, Shema Yisrael, Hear, O Israel, Yehovah Eloheinu, Yehovah Echad. Yehovah is our Elohim. Yehovah is one. And then he says, Ve'ahavta et Yehovah Elohecha. And you shall love Yehovah with all your heart, Ubechol nafshecha ubechol meodecha, and with all your soul and all your might. And in all of the entire Bible is only one place where God says he will do something with all his heart and all his soul. And that is planting the people of Israel back in their land. So when we hear, that's not some small trivial thing. That is the only thing God ever said he'll do with all his heart and all his soul. And he's done it. It's begun to happen. It hasn't been completed. We still have millions of Jews in the diaspora and the 10 lost tribes. And so there's ways to go, but it's beginning to happen. And God does that with all his heart and soul.
Oh, that's incredible. And Jeremiah 32, this is right after he receives the revelation that his cousin is going to come in to the prison and offer for Jeremiah to buy some land, and he puts the title deeds in earthen vessels and to bury it in that land. And he says that this is going to happen, that Israel is going to come back one day. And
I love that prophecy because I know where Jeremiah was from. I've been to that place, the village of Anatot, and it talks. I mean, it's an incredible image there. They're buying and selling land, and they're like, "You're gonna want to buy land? This is worthless. The Babylonians are about to take the land."
Right, they got the siege wall around Jerusalem.
Right, you want land? I mean, it's like buying swampland in Florida, right? I mean, what would you want this for? And his point is that this prophecy will be fulfilled, and now we look back, and the prophecy has been fulfilled. Now the nations of the world don't want this. They're murmuring and they're speaking against Jehovah and against his Messiah, like it talks about in Psalm 2. They wanted to, the UNESCO has made this proclamation that the Jews have no historical connection to Jerusalem. Jeremiah wrote this, whether you believe in God or not, there's no disputing Jeremiah wrote this in around 586 BC. We know the date from archaeology. So he wrote this in 586 BC. And he's talking there about how God will do this with all his heart and soul, plant the Israelites back in their land. And UNESCO says that there's no connection between the Jews and the land. What are they talking about? I mean, it's insanity. I mean, I feel like sometimes I'm in that movie with Planet of the Apes. It's a madhouse in here, a madhouse. I mean, you're dealing with the United Nations. They are delusional.
Well, they need to pass a resolution against ignorance and stupidity, but they'd have to
no
jail
members.
them all.
Right. Okay.
That's it.
So Zephaniah 3:9 is one of the key prophecies in the Bible about the restoration of all things that he talks about in Acts 3:21. For then I will turn to the ki azefoch el amim safa brura. For then I will turn to the people's pure language, likro kulam b'shem Yehovah la'avdo shchem echad. To call all of them upon the name of Jehovah to serve him with, literally says, one shoulder. And the image there is everyone is standing shoulder to shoulder in a line, serving Jehovah together. Now, what is the image here of Zephaniah 3:9? When I read this, it's immediately clear to me that Zephaniah 3:9 is an undoing of the curse of the Tower of Babel. What happened at the Tower of Babel in Genesis is all the nations came together and they had one language, and that language was Hebrew. And what did they use that Hebrew for? They said, let's build for ourselves a name and we'll rebel against God. And God then scattered them throughout the world and gave them different languages so they couldn't do that. And he's saying that curse will be undone. And in the end times, we'll all come together once again with a single language, with a pure language, that original Hebrew that was the language of creation. All mankind will speak that language once again, not to build for themselves a name, but to call upon the name of Jehovah, to serve him and not themselves, not to build their tower, but to build up the name of Jehovah with one shoulder. And we're in the beginning of that process, Michael. This can't happen until first the Jews restore their own language. There was this big debate in the 1800s in the Jewish world in Europe. There were 4 daily newspapers in Hebrew. People couldn't speak Hebrew, but they could read and write in Hebrew. And people said, wait a minute, this isn't our language. That's some language of some ancient prophets who are now dead. We should make Yiddish the national language of the Jewish people. And the Jewish people as a whole rejected that. They said Yiddish was the language of the exile, the language of the diaspora, the language of our slavery. We must restore the pure language of the prophets. And I believe that's part of what's going on here. This is part of the prophecy of Zephaniah 3:9. We're witnessing it happening in front of our eyes, almost in slow motion. One more prophecy, Michael. Zechariah 14, verse 9. I love this prophecy.
And this is part of all the prophets have spoken from the beginning. This is a restoration.
This is what Acts 3:21 is about.
They know this. They know this.
Absolutely. Now, I'll tell you one of the reasons I love this verse, Michael. It's actually the closing verse of the daily prayers in traditional rabbinical Judaism. Now, I was raised as an Orthodox Jew, but at a certain point in my upbringing, I'm like, all these prayers, we would have prayers 3 times a day, every day. and it was prayers by rote, and I would often come at the end because I was ditching. I just couldn't do it standing there for 45 minutes, the same prayers day after day by rote. But I would come to this, and it would be sung. It's part of the Adon Olam. V'haya Yehovah lemelech al kol haaretz. And it shall come to pass that Yehovah will be king over the entire earth. Bayom hahu Yihiyeh Yehovah echad. And on that day, Yehovah will be echad. He'll be one, ushemo echad. And his name will be one. And the rabbis in the Talmud talk about this. I only discovered this later, that in the Talmud, they say, what does this verse mean, his name will be one? And I talk about this in my book, Shattering the Conspiracy of Silence. What does it mean his name will be one? They say, today in the exile, we call upon, instead of saying Yud He Vave, we say Adonai. And in the end times, we'll all call upon the name, the entire earth, all mankind. His name will be one. We won't read the letters Yud He Vave and speak them as Adonai. We'll speak them the way they're written, with those vowels, Yehovah. And in my teaching I did, and this is in the Gentiles shall know my name teaching, I bring the source Rabbi Jacob Bachrach from the year 1890, who brings this verse and brings the Talmudic passage. And he says, when it says that we'll read it the way it's written, it means with the vowels, which proves back then they knew what the vowels were, and these are still the true vowels, Yehovah. And so what I see happening is that this explosion of information is part of the fulfillment of this prophecy to restore the name, restore the language, restore the people, and just restore the truth. It's part of the restoration of all things. But I mean, look, Michael, we're living in this incredible period. 1,034 Hebrew Bible manuscripts with the name Yehovah. We've got all these documents that nobody has studied. The Hebrew scholar in Israel literally told me that they don't care. They're not interested. That's just Christian stuff. So who knows what treasures are still to be found in the Hebrew Epistle of James, the Hebrew Epistle of Jude that's in the British Library.
You know, this is one of the things that we're doing on the break, going through Jude, the Hebrew Jude, and this is an epistle that he's telling the people to earnestly contend for the faith that was once delivered to the saints. You know, this is part of the restoration, because at the end of the first century, it was already being lost. Paul, Shaul admitted it. All those in Asia had turned away from him. He spent 2 years and 3 months at one school, the school of Tyrannus, and teaching them, and yet they had turned away from him at that time. He mentions by names the people that have turned away and gone to the dark side, and there in Jude, he said that we must earnestly contend to restore the faith that was once delivered to the saints. That faith that Yeshua and his disciples, what they were teaching, what they were promulgating, was being lost at that time. And so if we think in the Christian world, in the Christian church, that we have the faith once delivered to the saints, that was lost centuries ago, millennia ago. But yet Yeshua said, I will declare your name. I will make it known, and I have made it known. And he said he would send the Holy Spirit to lead us into all truth. And that's why we need the Spirit to lead us into all truth. As Nehemia is talking in Jeremiah, in this prophecy in Jeremiah, that he would send fishers, and they would fish them out of their exiles. And then he would send hunters, and they would hunt them out of the exiles. And this is what he was talking about. In the 1800s, there were Jews that were coming back to Israel. They were waking up and coming back to Israel. But most of the Jews in Germany were saying, we're more German than we are Jewish. And they were living like kings in Europe.
Michael, I'm actually going to be giving a lecture at this university. They invited me to come speak about the Holocaust. And I said, what I really want to share, what's in my heart, is something called I call it the Lost Scrolls of Auschwitz. And I had no idea about this until a few years ago. It turns out that some of the Jewish slaves whose job it was to pull the bodies out of the gas chamber and burn them, they wrote their accounts of what happened, and these were discovered by the Poles afterwards in these piles of ashes. And we can read these now today. And one of the things he shares is how these Jews are about to be put into the gas chambers. And there's this old Rebbitzin, the wife of a rabbi, and she gets really angry. She said, our rabbis have been telling the people, don't leave, that Hungary is our home, that we shouldn't go back to the land of Israel. And now look what's happened. And I pray to Jehovah every day that we don't have another Holocaust. But there's a reason that the Jews have a country and a place to flee to. There are Jews today in my neighborhood who come from France. I hear French all over my neighborhood in Jerusalem today.
Yeah.
And they're there as refugees. Because if a Jew walks down the streets in France with a kippah and tzitzit who looks like a Jew, he'll be attacked. And there was this liberal leftist journalist who doubted this in Malmö, Sweden, and went there, and the person was attacked. And he said, okay, the Jews are telling the truth. You can't live in Europe anymore as a Jew without being attacked in these certain areas that have been taken over by other populations.
Well, the fishers fished them out. Herzl, they fished them out, and then the hunters hunted them out from behind every rock and in every cave. And ladies and gentlemen, part of what happens is Israel comes back into the land. The Gentiles then start coming to Israel from the ends of the earth and crying out in repentance. And the Almighty, because they repent, the Almighty makes his name known. And what is his name? In over 1,000 Hebrew manuscripts,
his name is Jehovah.
And so this is the time that the restoration of all things is beginning. And that means to those believers, that means that Yeshua has to remain in heaven until the restoration of all things, and then the Messiah comes.
All right, Michael, I want to read one last prophecy if we have time. Isaiah 66, verse 20. It's talking about the nations. It said, then they will bring all your brothers from the nations as an offering to Jehovah. The nations are involved in restoring the Jews and the Israelites to the land of Israel. And when I hear about these organizations that are actually doing this, fulfilling prophecy, I say we truly are in this period of things being restored. And I hope soon that I pray soon. Can I end in prayer?
Please do.
Yehovah Avinu Sheba Shemayim, send us your son, Father. Send us the Mashiach, Yehovah, whoever you have planned, who is your son, Yehovah. Let us know him soon. Let him be here on earth soon to restore all things, to bring that final restoration to the world. In your holy name, Yehovah. Amen.
Amen.
You have been listening to Hebrew Voices with Nehemia Gordon. Thank you for supporting Nehemia's Makor Hebrew Foundation. Learn more at nehemiaswall.com.